Hey everyone. Today I'm joined by Federico Marchesi. Federico's career spans a number of senior leadership roles across companies such as Whirlpool and Brembo, and is currently the Chief Supply Chain Officer for Europe with Hire. Federico, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Sam, for inviting me.
Pleasure. As a starting point, could you just tell me a little bit about yourself and your career journey today?
Absolutely. So I'm currently the Chief Supply Chain Officer for the business in Europe of the Hire Group. Hire is the biggest home appliance producer worldwide. I ended up in supply chain a bit by mistake or randomly. I always love to say that I'm an engineer by education, love engineering, I love numbers, complex system. I did a bit of research there. When I graduated, I didn't exactly know what to do in my life. I had a couple of roles in the operation, R&D, and so on, and then I stumbled upon supply chain. I got passionate about it, and I had different roles in different areas of supply chain across my career. In home appliance industry, I moved to automotive for a while with a global role, and then I moved back in the challenge home appliance industry, and now I'm for head of supply chain for the European business.
Fantastic. In your career, how have you found the home appliance industry and sort of progressing through that? Obviously, it's quite a complex space, both from a manufacturing customer standpoint. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. The beauty of home appliance industry, especially if you work in the operation environment, is that you have all the challenges of a typical consumer goods business. You need to deal with erratic demand, you have complex customers to serve, multi-channel, omni-channel, and so on. But on the other side, you have the typical challenges of being a manufacturer. So you have a complex supply chain, very long with components coming all over the world, high complexity, prone to disruption. So it's a bit of I would say, a dream space if you love this work, if you love the challenges. It's also an industry with quite slim margin that requires necessarily to be very effective on cost, very effective in the use of the working capital. And as a consequence, the role of supply chain in this industry is really key in running, to have a very good running operation.
Brilliant. Could you tell me, earlier in your career, what was some advice that you were given by mentors that helped shape where you've got to today?
Yeah. I always say that my career went through, now it's very easy now to look a bit in the rear mirror. However, I graduated as an engineer. I did some research work on control system, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, or what was out there in the job market. So I wanted to work in R&D, but I wanted to do more in algorithm and so on, and the positions were not that many. And one of the topical moments was I was doing an interview actually for Whirlpool that was I spent a long time in my career, and the HR dealing with the hiring of that position actually in the interview told me, based on the question you made, based on what passionate you and so on, you might get a role in the broader operation management rather than specifically R&D. You are very interested in complex system. You are very interested in dealing with problem of high level of difficulties, numbers, and so on. So look to broader a bit your view. Don't focus on R&D, but try to get more experience. So that was a topical moment that had a couple of ramifications that I saw later on in my career. Probably the second one was after, I think I had 4 or 5 years work experience still in Berke. I started to work in a team doing corporate strategy, M&A, and so on. And I spent a lot of time with dealing with operational restructuring, etc. And during one of the projects, I got a bit of a coaching from a very senior leader that told me to get ready for my next step in my career. We're already planning it. And what he told me at the time that really stayed with me was when I asked him a question in terms of how am I going to do in this new role if there are a couple of capabilities that I don't have. What he told me is make sure that you don't need to understand everything, but you need to make sure to pick the best people to do what you do. It was very challenging at the time to learn that you don't necessarily need to be the smartest in the room, but you need to get around the best possible people, both in terms of competencies, but also complement you in terms of skills, leadership, etc.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I'm keen to sort of dive into that a little bit more. As a headhunter, that's obviously something that we do a lot, and I always love getting people's views. How do you go about assessing the best leaders for your team, both from a sort of technical standpoint, but then also outside of that? What is your process to work out who are the right people going to be for your organization and your leadership team?
Yeah. So let's say I have a very distinctive view about supply chain. To operate here, especially nowadays, post-COVID, in this new world, you need to have a mix of skill set. You need to understand statistics, you need to understand risk, you need to understand how complex supply chain works. So that's definitely, to me, non-negotiable. When I interview people or think about promote people, I make sure that this kind of basic skill set is included. That's very important. That's how I feel, that's how I operate. So I need to find something that fits with them. And the second point that I really learn on myself is people are as productive as possible if they feel part of a team, if they feel part of this mission. So what I always say, talking with my people, or when I do a bit of coaching or mentoring, is Sunday evening, I'm very happy to go to office. I'm very happy the next day I will go to office because I love the people I work with, because I love my job, because I feel that I can do something that is a value. So I always try to get people that are fitting from this cultural perspective, that love the impact they can have, that feel well in a team that is that can be challenging, where sometimes we need to deep dive in decision and so on, even though it's not, people always say micromanagement, but sometimes that our hands very dirty. So that's another kind of behavioral skills that I'm looking for. Then the last point that I learned also is I want to have teams that are very diverse in terms of view. You might be accustomed with the color. I'm blue, so I'm a bit introvert, very data driven, and I love to have people that are different from me. I mean, sometimes extrovert people, sometimes people that are more into how do we do change management, how do we get people on board so that they can help me and the whole team overall in being more effective, looking at the product from a different angle, or making sure that we can move an organization that can be very diverse together with us.
Fantastic. Moving away from that to a bit of a different topic, supply chain is changing a lot very, very quickly.
Yes.
What are some things that you think that people should be focusing on, particularly earlier in their career today, to enable them 5, 10, 15 years from now?
Yeah. So supply chain is changing. I mean, exactly as you are saying. The skill set you need before COVID is not the skill set you need before. The tool we had access, or the tool we have access now, they were not even existing probably 3 to 4 years ago. So asking me what will be needed in 10 years, I need to do a bit of a leap of faith. I need to imagine how this world will look like in 10 years. However, I think my guess would be understanding risk and statistics is very important. At the end of the day, the role of supply chain is a lot about managing trade-off. It's about managing risk. It's about managing the best combination of decisions. There is not typically one decision that is good for everything or is the optimal. You really need to assess this. So risk and statistics all work very well together. One of the recommendations I give to my team is to read a couple of books on simple, in terms of way of thinking, at least. The second one is get accustomed to what AI, machine learning, algorithm can do, even in function outside supply chain. For example, what we see now happening in supply chain is development of algorithm that were very common if you work on social networks a couple of years ago, or some of the forecasting model we're using nowadays, they have a long way back from contrast system. So get a bit of accustomed with the technologies that are happening in machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so on, AI agents. Definitely in the next 10 years, the work of human will be different. We'll have more agents doing day-to-day activities rather than having humans. However, it's still important that we understand what is the reason why we do this thing. Maybe we'll just not give, I'm sure, the keys of a car to algorithm. The last point is to try, especially early in the career, to explore a bit. Supply chain is quite wide, but depending upon the definition of each single company, you have procurement, planning, logistics, manufacturing, and so on. So early in your career, try to experiment. Work from different angles, get different skill set. You will probably build a certain spike on one of the skill set of supply chain, but make sure that you try and you have this view from different perspective. It will be much more helpful down the road.
On that point, I'm curious, just in terms of your background coming from an R&D standpoint, how did you find that R&D basis helped you move into a wider supply chain role in the future?
Yeah. So I would say from a pure, I will make it very material. When you develop algorithm for contract process, the thinking process you need to use is pretty much similar to what you do in supply chain when you're trying to solve a problem. You have the data, you need to test options, you can run simulation and so on, especially nowadays with everything that we can access, digital twins, data, big data, and so on. So the mindset of supply chain nowadays is pretty similar. We can test hypotheses, we can simulate scenarios. So this was very helpful for me on solving complex problems. The other thing is I'm naturally curious. That helps me in supply chain. If you want to have a well-functioning supply chain, you need to definitely think outside what is your own box. You need to see what's happening there. And this is much more simple if you are a curious person. You are interested to understand how a factory works, or what are the challenges of a supply, or how the shipping business works, and the sea freight, and so on. So you will get a lot of learning that will help in getting a more effective supply chain, better managing risk, better managing redundancy, etc.
Fantastic. If we were to look at someone who was just starting out their career in supply chain, what would your advice be for that person?
Yeah. So first of all, learn to manage a bit your emotions. It is a challenging job. That's the nature of supply chain, and it will not change. You will always have something not working. You will always have an unexpected demand. You will always have a supply disruption. So the kind of resilience you build, the kind of resilience you develop in managing your own stress and emotion, it's important for your future success. You need to get used to don't be overwhelmed by stress. And I know it's a bit, now used or overused. The stock mentality of focus on what you can control works very well with the supply chain. Don't be prisoner of your own stress and emotion. You just become less effective. You just don't perform very well. You cannot sustain a very high level of stress for a long time until you learn to cope with it and just accept that it is what it is. So that's something that I would recommend early in the career. And the second one is the same before. Try to experiment with it. Try to be curious about looking from a different perspective. What is the work of someone else? Have your experience. Try to work on the manufacturing side, be on the shop floor, or deal with procurement and with the challenges of having a supplier delivering on time and the right cost and so on. These kind of different experiences typically added value later on.
Brilliant. And on the other side of that, what advice would you give to someone who is further along in their career, who is looking to become a chief supply chain officer? They're maybe one step away from that. What would your advice be to that person?
Always remember about the team. This is not a lone work. You by definition manage a chain or a network. You manage a chain or a network of companies, but you also manage a network of people. Make sure that you build your succession. Make sure that people want to work with you. It is much more fun if you can work with people who have a very high esteem. It's much more fun if people want to work with you. It's much more fun to see people being successful in your team and then promote them and let them take another role. Makes you a stronger leader, makes you someone respected within the organization. Always remember to balance out a bit the different objectives. I mean, at the end of the day, if you work in supply chain, you always have to balance out the financial result and the inventory and the service level and the customer and so on. So don't get overstressed about your own specific objective. Just remember that you have this kind of network role and we need to ensure that everything works. And especially what is relevant for the customer. The final, let's say, person that we need to satisfy no matter what.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Federico. Some really, really good advice in there.
Good.
Good pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Sam. Have a nice day.